Herbert is the most deranged, predatory, and oftentimes hilarious character in Family Guy.
Hey there, little fella.
I'm 48.
This whole place is a giant mind.
However, what you probably didn't know is that Herbert's behavior is actually caused by an incredibly brutal upbringing, filled with neglect, war stories, and even completely restarting his life under a new identity.
Hello, I just moved in down the block. My name's Herbert, not Roy Mitchell.
And so, today I am going to be going over every major event in Herbert's life in order to reveal to you what shaped Herbert from being an innocent young man to becoming one of the most notorious creeps in Quahog.
I think Zach and Cody would be funnier if they did the show in their underpants.
You see, unlike other Family Guy characters, Herbert actually spent most of his life outside of Quahog. In fact, he spent his early adulthood outside of America altogether, as in 1944, Herbert joined the US Army at an incredibly young age, where he was then immediately thrust into the deep end of World War II, with Herbert being tasked with being an escort for a bombing raid over South Germany, a bombing raid which, unfortunately for him, would be swiftly intercepted by the German Luftwaffe.
But there was one stubborn pilot who saw through our disguise.
And so, upon landing in southern Germany, Herbert was then captured and forced into a concentration camp, where his life then rested in the balance of an SS officer named Franz Schlicknot, who, fortunately for Herbert and unfortunately for the children of Quahog, decided to let him live.
If it pointed to the left, you did hard labor. If it pointed to the right, you died. I was spared death, but I was given hard labor.
However, it wasn't exactly the dream life for Herbert, as Franz Schlicknock took a particular interest in making Herbert's life a living hell. And for the last 2 years of the war, Herbert was forced into doing brutal manual labor tasks, although I must say, some of these weren't exactly as bad as others.
But some of those bottles still had a little bit of soda in them. It would spill out of my hands and make them kinda sticky.
And once the war had finally concluded in 1945, Herbert then fled Germany in the pursuit of a quiet, happy life as a priest back in the States. However, a quiet, happy life is not what he got.
Oh, rats!
As it turns out that during this time, Herbert's real name was Roy Mitchell, and after suffering years of abuse in the war, he then unfortunately decided to continue this cycle by abusing his position as a priest and committing various unspeakable crimes.
So if you see news reports about a Roy Mitchell from 3 towns over who was accused of all sorts of nonsense and left in a hurry, it's got nothing to do with me.
Which, of course, then forced him to flee once more, this time moving 3 towns over to Quahog, where we see Roy, or should I say Herbert, first trying out his new identity on a rather stylish looking Peter Griffin.
Because again, I'm Herbert.
Although eventually, Herbert would be able to shake off all of the allegations, which he did by shaving his head and joining the shadowy elitist Skull and Bones Society. Because, as we all know, it's okay to commit horrific crimes as long as you're part of the ruling class.
As is customary with all our new members, you now have to spend 7 minutes in the closet with our most senior member.
We don't start the clock until the door closes.
And so, with this protection secured, Herbert would then go on a generational run of pervertedness. However, before we get into that, today's video is sponsored by Manta Sleep. That's right, the brilliant people over at Manta Sleep have sent me over their Manta Sleep Mask Pro, as well as their highly rated Manta Sleep Sound Mask, which comes equipped with razor-thin Bluetooth headphones, so that after a long day of playing football or, watching Family Guy funny funny moments compilations, I can then drift off into a peaceful sleep accompanied by soothing sounds. And no matter what your budget is, Manta Sleep has the perfect sleep mask for you, as well as having an incredible range of items, including their innovative cooling eye cups, which I must say are incredibly handy on those hot nights where everything is melting. So please, do yourself a favor and go to Manta Sleep and use my code HARRY for 10% off your purchase. That's right, code HARRY for 10% off your purchase. And of course, a massive thank you to Manta Sleep for sponsoring this video. Anyway, back to Herbert. It's clear that once he joined the Skull and Bones Society, he knew that he was above the law. As in season 3's To Love and Die and Dixie, in Herbert's first ever appearance, he's already trying to lure Chris down to his basement with the promise of sweet treats.
You like popsicles?
Well, sure.
Then you need to come on down to the cellar. I got a whole freezer full of popsicles.
And honestly, Herbert only gets more and more creepy in this episode, as once Chris is forced into witness protection in the Deep South, well, then Herbert spends all day every day for weeks obsessively leaving him 113 of the most desperate and depraved answering machine messages known to man.
Guess who? Sorry to leave you so many messages. Just lonely here. Thinking about the muscle-bound paper boy.
However, it isn't just Chris that Herbert terrorizes, as all throughout the early seasons of Family Guy, we see Herbert making himself known in school zones, in front of ice cream trucks, in the Star Wars universe, or hey, even just in the streets of Quahog. I mean, there is literally nowhere for these children to escape Herbert.
Pedal faster! I can't go any faster!
Where you going, kids? Hey, I just want to talk to you. Why don't you come over to my place for a glass of wine and a couple of fruit pies, and then we can go in the back room and play crazy snakes.
And truthfully, as bad as it sounds, this is where Herbert became one of my all-time favorite Family Guy characters, as you could always rely on him to carry the edgy humor of an episode and just take it a million miles further.
Oh no, there's no police here to help me. I hope you don't find the money strapped to my thigh.
Although, it's at this point in Herbert's story that he truly tries to turn things around, with Herbert then becoming much more of a hero figure, which we can see in the episodes Petergeist and German Guy. And starting off with Petergeist, the entire Griffin house is haunted by a poltergeist when Peter starts messing around with a Native American skull that he found in his back garden.
Peter, are you peeing in that skull?
Oh, no, Lois, I'm getting up and walking all the way to the bathroom and doing it there. Pain in the ass.
And honestly, this haunting gets so bad, to the point where Chris is visited by Ronald McDonald before being brutally ambushed by a tree. Pardon the pun. However, it's at this very moment that Herbert transforms from pervert to hero, which he does by declaring that Chris is off limits.
Hey, Skinny Britches, that there's my man. Why don't you pick on someone your own size?
With Herbert then displaying his bravery by using his walker to part the ground like Moses, and then leap into the unknown oblivion to defeat this evil tree once and for all.
You shall not pass.
Which really just goes to show you that Herbert will do anything to protect Chris, which we then see once again in season 9's German Guy, with this episode starting off seemingly innocent enough, with Chris making friends with a German puppet maker.
My name is Chris, and I like candy and jumping on colorful birds.
Wow! What else do I like?
However, this isn't just any old puppet maker, as this turns out to be Franz Schlicknot, the SS officer that, of course, made Herbert's life a living hell. Although, once Herbert tells this story to Peter and Lois, they completely dismiss him.
It all sounds kind of sketchy. Wait, are you Jamie Kennedy? Am I being skunked or puked or whatever? Some
I'm telling you the truth.
And once Lois and Peter don't believe him, Herbert then tries to tell Chris directly that his new friend was an SS officer, and even going so far as giving him an ultimatum between him and Franz. Which, I mean, yeah, after all of these years of Herbert trying to hit on him, I can understand why Chris chose Franz.
Chris, you have to choose. It's either Franz or me.
Although, boy, this sure does end up being the wrong decision, as when Chris mistakenly opens the wrong door to go to the bathroom, he then finds all of Schlicknot's SS memorabilia, which then, of course, leads to both Chris and Peter being locked in his basement with no possible chance to escape.
I promise I won't tell anyone. Just let my dad go.
Oh, I'm afraid that is quite impossible.
Well, that is, until Herbert is alerted by his dog Jessie of Chris's danger, with Herbert then promising to free him in quite possibly the funniest and most Herbert way imaginable.
You know, I gotta say, Chris, all my life I wanted to see you locked in a basement, but now that it's happened, all I want to do is get you out.
And so, true to his word, Herbert then puts on his old US Army uniform and takes on his old captor Franz Schlicknot in a duel to the death, with this ultimately allowing Herbert to vanquish all of the demons of his past and, of course, free Chris and Peter in the process.
Say good night, you Nazi bastard.
And so, after all of these heroic acts, surely Herbert would reform his character and attempt to become far less predatory. Well, the Family Guy writers had other ideas, as they then completely ramp up Herbert's obsession with Chris, which can be seen initially in the episode The Courtship of Stewie's Father, which starts off with Chris launching a baseball right into Herbert's house.
Aw, crap.
Well, looks like the good Lord just sent me a conversation starter.
And of course, the ever opportunistic Herbert, in order to get Chris into his house to do some chores such as raking the leaves and accompanying him to dinner.
Souvenir photograph?
Hell yes.
And this is where we get our first true glimpse of just how deeply Herbert loves Chris, as he then drifts off into a 1950s style fantasy marriage, in which Chris is the traditional breadwinning husband, and Herbert the loving stay-at-home wife.
He loves to mow and weed. I cook like Betty Crocker, and I look like Donna Reed.
And if this isn't disturbing enough, which it definitely is, well then Herbert even fantasizes about having children with Chris. And of course, all of the whimsical ways that they can recreate the perfect picket fence life.
Griffin, he knows best. The kids play howdy-doody as the sun sets in the west.
And hey, who said manifestation doesn't work? As in season 11's Crisscross, Meg catches Chris stealing from Lois's wallet, and then forces him to be her slave in order to buy her silence.
I won't tell Mom and Dad about the money if you promise to do whatever I say.
Meg, this is how a lot of porn starts.
However, eventually once Meg's demands get too ridiculous, Chris then decides that he's simply going to run away, with Herbert's fantasies of living with Chris all coming true once he arrives at his doorstep.
Hi, I ran away from home. Do you mind if I live with you?
Live with me? My goodness, I feel like I'm gonna pinch myself to see if I'm dreaming.
And boy, Herbert wastes absolutely no time whatsoever in taking advantage of this situation, as he gives Chris 3 cups of NyQuil before getting him in bed at 6 PM and then trying to move their beds together.
Life is like a new baseball glove. At first, you think you're never gonna get a ball in there, but then you oil it up, work your fingers around in there a little, and pretty soon you're pitching and catching.
However, thankfully, by complete accident, Chris is able to avoid the horrors of what come next simply by letting out a well-timed fart, which, let's just say, completely throws Herbert off his game.
Sorry.
You really know how to waste a Cialis, don't you?
And in one of the funniest turn of events in Family Guy history, after all of these years of desperately wanting to live with Chris, Herbert then realizes that the reality of it is far less glamorous. As, well, Chris is a lazy teenager who, unsurprisingly, does some things that will upset an older man.
Excuse me? I am not gonna cook you dinner while you sit here in your own mess playing your TV games.
Oh, and the martyr returns.
Chris, I think it's time for you to go.
Okay, so at this point in Herbert's story, we have to ask an important question. Does the town of Quahog know about his misdeeds? Well, the answer is no. No, they don't. As despite Herbert being so blatant in his attempts to woo Chris, it's only Stewie that's ever able to see Herbert for what he truly is and call him out on it.
Gosh, gosh, bagosh, it's a brand new paperboy. That's a mighty full sack you're carrying.
Piss off, you perverted old freak!
Ooh, we got a fighter.
In fact, everyone else in Quahog is so oblivious, even the Griffin family, that in the episode Play It Again Brian, the Griffins actually invite Herbert to babysit their kids. And yes, this includes Chris.
Well, no offense to you, Meg, but you're a 17-year-old girl and I don't need you here.
And in my view, this is one of my all-time favorite Family Guy episodes, as Herbert not only makes ridiculous and outdated rules for the children,
no cussing, clean your plates, and only a half hour of radio and then it's off to bed.
However, he also gives us a handful of absolutely golden one-liners throughout the episode, with my personal favorite of these being when Chris talks back to him.
Well, that sucks.
And don't you mouth off to me or I'm gonna slap you right in your penis.
In fact, Herbert is so out of pocket in this episode that even Chris, who hasn't batted an eyelid at any of Herbert's weird and creepy behavior thus far, starts to get suspicious of Herbert's intent.
Are you a pedophile?
However, as Herbert's story goes on, he starts to get used less and less within Family Guy, going from a valued side character that would light up B-plots with his brilliantly twisted one-liners, to now merely being an easy punchline when the writers want a cheap laugh.
You know what? He's earned that.
And so, why is this? Well, I think the answer is rather obvious. You see, Herbert is an offensive character in an age where censorship in comedy has arguably never been higher, with writers, comedians, and shows alike scared that if they say or show the wrong thing, that it will be their turn to be cancelled and taken off the air.
Hey, are you at Dog Backwards from Twitter?
I am. Are you a fan?
You racist jerk! I hope you get foot and mouth disease!
And in 2019, this problem only got worse for Family Guy, as Disney acquired Fox, which now meant that Family Guy was a Disney show.
What's your name?
Brian?
Let's see. There we go. Brian. See you at Disneyland.
Bring money.
And of course, with Disney now in charge, they probably weren't too happy with Herbert's character and most likely demanded that Family Guy stop using him. Which honestly is a great shame, as in my view, Herbert is one of Family Guy's greatest ever side characters.
Well, Jesse, I guess we gotta find some other way to spend our evenings.
And now back to ESPN's exclusive coverage of the Little League World Series.
Oh, jackpot!
And had so much room to grow and be expanded. And so, this is Herbert's entire story explained. And let me know in the comments, why do you think Herbert was cancelled?